When the storm slammed into the mountains, the radios went dead and panic took hold. People froze. No one knew what to do. No one, except one woman. She stood up, quiet and calm, and took command. And when the National Guard finally made it through the snow, their commander walked in and saluted her. But who was she? And why had no one even noticed her until that moment? Welcome to Heartland Stories. I'm Ethan Hale, and here I share true stories about honor, kindness, and quiet strength. Ready to find out how a forgotten field nurse became the one who saved them all? Hit that like button, and let's begin. Sarah Bennett was 62. She lived alone in a modest house tucked away near the edge of town, about an hour from the nearest gas station and farther still from anything resembling a crowd. Folks around there mostly knew her as the Colonel's widow. No one asked about her past, and she never brought it up. Not because she was ashamed. She just didn't see the point anymore. Since her husband Jack passed away from lung cancer, Sarah had stayed away from the veterans' events. She hadn't looked at the old photo albums in years. Didn't watch the war documentaries. It was like she'd packed up that chapter of her life and quietly shut the drawer. But the house still held traces of who she'd been. On her walls hung faded topographical maps, mountain trails, shelter locations, old evacuation routes. Tucked behind jars of rice and soup cans in the pantry was a tightly packed trauma kit, bandages, ampoules, tourniquets. And up in the closet sat a military field radio, once Jack's. Every spring, like clockwork, she cleaned its contacts. Just in case. The email came out of nowhere. Some civilian training retreat, emergency readiness, wilderness survival. Posted with the help of the National Guard. Sarah hovered over the delete button, but didn't press it. Maybe it was the date coming up, 3 years since Jack had passed. Maybe it was the long, gray winter, where every day started looking the same. Or maybe it was that kind of silence in life that books and tea can't quite fill. She clicked, scrolled. At the bottom was a phone number. She dialed. A young man answered, voice full of energy. Hi. Yes, absolutely. We'd be glad to have you. We're always short on support staff for logistics and food service. Were you hoping to join the training sessions? No, she said gently. I can help out behind the scenes. Meals, supplies, whatever's needed. I'm not looking to stand out. Just trying to be useful. Oh, perfect, he replied, relieved. Everyone wants to be in the rescue teams. Nobody thinks about the folks keeping it all running behind the curtain. We really appreciate it. He didn't ask about her background. Didn't notice the way she asked detailed, deliberate questions about routes, shelter placements, incoming weather. And Sarah didn't offer anything. She didn't mention her 4 deployments. Didn't talk about the field hospitals deep in dusty valleys. Didn't bring up the Bronze Star tucked in the back of her dresser drawer. She just said, all right then, I'll bring some of my own supplies. And a few things, just in case. The next morning, she started packing. Warm clothes, waterproof boots, a flashlight, a power bank. And almost without thinking, she slipped a folded medical protocol into her bag. A weathered topographical map. And Jack's old military radio wrapped in leather cord. Old habits don't die. They just wait for the right moment. The training base was set high in the mountains, an old wooden outpost that had been converted into a retreat center. Snow covered everything in a thick, heavy silence. The air was sharp and clean, like cut glass. Sarah stepped out of her SUV, adjusted her scarf, and looked up at the flag fluttering above the entrance. The wind pulled at it sharply, like a memory trying to be remembered. From the very first step, it was clear she didn't belong here. The others were at least 20 years younger, loud, energetic, confident. They wore National Guard hoodies or patches from volunteer response teams. They spoke in acronyms and jargon, TAC loadouts, alert protocols, command chains. One of them even carried a drone in his pack, like it was a toy. No one introduced Sarah. She walked over to the whiteboard on her own, where the schedule and group list were posted. Next to her name, blank. No assignment. No team. A tall man with a buzz cut and a voice like gravel, Jack, the lead instructor, stood nearby. She'd learn later he was a former Marine. He was breaking people into groups, leadership, medics, tech, coordination. He spoke with confidence, the kind that comes from drills and simulations, not real disasters. When he was done assigning everyone, Sarah still stood off to the side. Jack didn't even glance her way. One of the younger guys, passing by with a coffee mug, smirked. "So, Mrs. Bennett, you on oatmeal duty? Folks are already calling you the tea lady." Someone behind him chuckled. Sarah didn't take offense. She knew youth often mistakes volume for value. She gave a quiet smile. Someone's got to keep the pantry in order. And she really did go there. Not out of embarrassment, but because she saw what no one else did. Food was scattered without any order. The stove wasn't working right. No one had marked the water reserves. She'd lived through more than one crisis where logistics weren't just helpful, they saved lives. While the rest of the group argued about signaling techniques for a comms outage, Sarah was already working through something else in her head. What if the road got blocked by snow? Where were the backup shelters? Who'd need to be evacuated first? She didn't interrupt, didn't correct anyone. She just watched and remembered. That night, the kitchen was dim, lit only by the yellow glow of an old fixture hanging above the stove. Sarah sat on a wooden chair, sorting cans, marking expiration dates with a Sharpie. Outside, the mountain air pressed against the windows. Still, waiting. Laughter broke out from the room next door, bold, careless. These instructors, man. All this storm talk, it's just old folks panicking over a little snow. Yeah, give them a blanket and a fireplace, and they'll call it a mission. Sarah didn't respond. She kept working, quietly. Her hand instinctively reached down into a bin and brushed against a roll of gauze. Her fingers paused. Her eyes shifted, something flickering there that had nothing to do with the lamp. And suddenly, it wasn't this kitchen in the mountains anymore. It was another night. Afghanistan. Dust. Gunfire. A flipped Humvee. A young soldier bleeding out, calling for help. Sarah had worked alone that night. Under fire. She had nothing but a trauma pouch and grit. The kid lived. But those minutes, they stayed with her. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself back in the now. Back in the snow and canned food. They don't know, she thought. They don't have to. But when a real storm hits, we'll see who's still laughing. She stood up, calm as ever, and headed out to check the generator. Morning came with the sound of snow crunching under boots and an eerie kind of stillness. The air felt thick, unmoving, like the world was holding its breath. Sarah stepped out onto the porch, thermos in hand. The sky was lead gray. Shadows stretched blue across the drifts, like someone had drained the color from the day. By the entrance, someone had pinned up a weather report from the regional center. Storm level 4. Expected arrival, 6 p.m. Update. New model. Storm to arrive 12 hours earlier. Sarah read it twice. Her mind clicked into place like a machine that had never rusted. Routes. Elevation. Wind speed. Precipitation density. This wasn't training anymore. This was isolation. Loss of contact. Risk to life. Sarah stepped into the main lodge where the morning briefing was underway. Jack stood at the front, sketching something on the whiteboard. The group sat in silence, listening with that exhausted kind of focus that doesn't ask questions. She waited for a pause. "We need to activate internal emergency protocol now," she said quietly. "The storm's accelerating. We won't have 18 hours. Might not even have 8. Jack didn't even turn around. He scoffed, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "Thanks for your concern, Mrs. Bennett. Just keep the coffee coming, all right? We got the tactical stuff covered." Sarah nodded, said nothing, turned and walked back toward the kitchen. But her mind wasn't on pots or pantry shelves. The map was already spread out on the table. And in her head, routes, shelter zones, fuel supplies. If they wouldn't listen, she'd be ready anyway. Because when systems fail, it's not about who's the loudest. It's about who's ready to act. The storm hit without ceremony. Even the sky didn't get a chance to darken properly. It was like the wind skipped the warning and came in swinging. First came the sharp snap of bending trees. Then a gust so strong it could knock a man off his feet. And just like that, lights flickered. Radios fell silent. The world dimmed, drowned in a wall of snow. It felt less like weather and more like a message. "You're on your own now." Sarah was at the kitchen window when she saw it. The American flag by the front gate ripped from its post and swallowed by white. 5 minutes later, the first scream came from the lodge. A young coordinator burst in, face pale, breath sharp. The NAV team didn't come back. 2 vans, 14 people, including a medic. They were supposed to be back 2 hours ago. Jack came storming out of his quarters, clutching a radio that only hissed static. "Damn it," he muttered, thumbing the button again. "West team, do you copy?" "West team, respond." Nothing. Just the wind, pressing against the building like a living thing. "Everybody move. Check the generator. Get search groups ready." He shouted order after order, contradicting himself with each breath. 1 second he wanted maps. The next, he needed equipment powered up. Then, no one should leave the building. No one knew what to do. Chaos spun like the storm outside. And right then, a young man near the entryway slipped on the ice-slick stairs, slamming hard into a broken metal chair leg. There was a sharp cry, then blood, bright red, spreading fast across the wood floor. "Medic! Somebody help!" Sarah was already there. No panic, no shouting. She dropped to her knees, assessed the wound, and pressed down on the artery with her bare hand. From her pocket, a clean gauze square, neatly folded. No need to call for a med kit. She was the med kit. Arterial. Pressure here. Hold it steady. No jerking. Her voice cut clean through the room. Calm. Certain. Like the storm outside didn't exist. Like panic had no place here. The room went still. One person set down a mug. Another stopped rifling through a drawer. Sarah stood up slowly, wiped her hands on a towel, and looked straight at Jack. "Where's the emergency protocol?" For the first time, Jack didn't see a widow or a kitchen volunteer. He saw someone who knew exactly what to do when no one else did. Sarah walked to the back wall, opened a cabinet without needing a key, like she'd always known where it was and what waited inside. She reached past the binders and boxes, pulled out a dust-covered red file. Emergency command protocol stamped across the front. She laid it down at the center table, flipped it open, directly to the tab marked Communication Failure/Team Missing. "I need someone to start reading the missing team list. Someone else, get to the map. We need their last known coordinates. And one of you, check the fuel levels on the generator." Now, her voice wasn't loud. She didn't raise it. But there was no room for questions. No hesitation. Only motion. Some people exchanged glances. One of the young instructors, the same guy who joked about oatmeal duty, stepped forward, lips curled with doubt. "Excuse me, but under whose authority exactly?" Sarah didn't answer right away. Instead, she pulled back her sweater sleeve. Slowly, wrapped around her wrist was a worn leather strap, and on it, a metal tag, stamped with the field medic insignia, and the symbol of a logistics command unit. A few recognized it right away. The rest just felt something shift in the room. "I'm not giving orders," she said, steady as ever. "I just know what happens if we don't start moving. I've worked in places where there were no maps. No light. No chance. We got people out without backup, without gear, without hope. And we're going to do it again." Silence. Then, movement. One person stepped to the map. Another began reading through the names. A third walked off toward the supply shed to check fuel. Jack stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, mouth set in a thin, quiet line. He didn't say a word. Didn't need to. Sarah turned to the evacuation plan, her mind clicking into gear like a machine built for moments like this. She hadn't come for recognition. She came to make damn sure no one got left behind. The map on the table was covered in marks. Different colors. Arrows. Circles. Risk zones, shelter spots, likely routes. Sarah moved quickly but with care, marking details in pencil with the confidence of someone who'd done this her whole life. And she had. Just not for a long time. "Last check-in was here," she said, pointing to the western ridge, an area the others hadn't even considered. "There's an old logging shelter out that way. No power. But it's got a propane stove. If there was anyone in that team with half a brain, they went there." Someone frowned. "But there aren't any trails out that direction. Not on the orientation maps." Sarah unfolded a second map, topographic, with fine elevation lines and neat, handwritten notes. "There's a service trail. Runs along the ridge. Less exposure to wind. Right here." She ran her finger down a narrow, twisting line. "It's passable. For people, geared light and fast. But they need to move now." One of the instructors spoke up. "Who's going?" Sarah didn't hesitate. Mike, you, Henry, Jen, and Chin. Take a trauma kit, 2 emergency beacons, and a handheld radio. Stick to the coordinates. Check in every 15. Mike was already strapping on his pack when he paused, turned, and looked back. Ms. Bennett, how'd you even know that trail was there? It's not in any of the official packets. Sarah looked at him, calm and steady, tilted her head just slightly. My husband and I used to train units out here. 20 years ago. Those trails, they're part of our memory. She paused. Some things you don't forget. Mike didn't answer. He just pulled the straps tight across his chest and headed out. Sarah didn't sit still. Not for a second. She moved through the lodge like its pulse. Not loud, but with clarity. No wasted steps. No wasted words. She turned the main hall into a command center. The big table became a tactical station. One of the bedrooms, now a med bay. Walls lined with maps, rotation charts, and shelter zone diagrams. Fuel prioritized the med room, radios, and heaters, she called out, scanning her notes. Mount the radio on the east wall, closest to the window. Better line for signal. Work in pairs. Tower shifts. No one runs themselves into the ground. If you go down, you don't help. You become a liability. Even Jack, who'd stood off to the side before, was now helping organize the med supplies. He didn't argue anymore. Sarah praised those who worked in sync, quietly, without fanfare. She pointed out mistakes, but never with blame. People followed her lead, not out of fear, but because they knew. She knew what she was doing. This wasn't about dominance. It was about responsibility. In her eyes, in her movements, in every word she spoke. Late that night, just before midnight, the radio, wired exactly the way she'd planned, crackled to life. Everyone froze. Base, this is the search team. We found them. Over. All accounted for. I repeat, all alive. 2 with mild frostbite. 1 twisted ankle. We're sheltered for now. Heading back. The room went completely silent. Then, exhales of relief. Someone clapped their hands against the table. One of the younger trainees quietly started crying. Didn't try to hide it. Sarah didn't break into emotion. She simply nodded, marked the map, and said, "Good. Prep the med station. Let's get them checked out as soon as they're in." Only after everyone moved back to their posts did she sit down. Slowly, she picked up a cup of tea, took a sip, and stared out the window where the storm still raged. No one called her the tea lady anymore. Now, everyone knew who the real leader in that lodge was. By dawn, the snow began to let up. The wind no longer screamed. It just whispered through the treetops. And then, through the white haze, headlights. A slow-moving convoy. 3 vehicles. Then 2 more. Painted on the doors, National Guard. Tired eyes turned toward the windows. Someone whispered, "Help's here." When the doors swung open, a rush of cold air flooded the lodge. And behind it, 8 soldiers in full gear. But their faces weren't hardened. They looked surprised. They'd expected chaos, panic, a mess barely holding together. Instead, they saw order, charts on the walls, working comm lines, a med station running on shifts, people engaged, focused, coordinated. It looked like a real command post. Because it was. "Who's in charge here?" the lead officer asked, brushing snow off his shoulders. No one answered. They all just turned together towards Sarah. She stood at the map, pencil in hand. The officer walked over. Not tall. Tired eyes. He stopped in front of her and snapped to attention. Saluted. Sarah hesitated a second, then stepped forward, returned the salute. Sharp. Precise. Muscle memory. "Master Sergeant Bennett?" he asked, surprised and respectful. "Yes," she nodded. "But last night, I was just the coordinator." He smiled slowly. "We served in the same field unit. Kandahar, 2004. You ran the emergency evac drills. I was the green kid with the clumsy hands." She looked at him more closely, and finally remembered. "You had a light step and very steady hands." He nodded. "Now I'm Captain Wilson. But I still remember what you said before those drills." He looked up, his voice quieter, almost like a vow. "In chaos, create structure. In panic, bring order." Sarah lowered her eyes, not in pride, but with a warm, worn kind of peace and quiet respect. For the ones who once learned from her, and who now showed up when it mattered most. The morning felt different. Not because the storm had passed, it was still rumbling out in the distant valleys. But inside the lodge, there was a new kind of quiet. Not fear. Respect. Just yesterday, these people had called Sarah the tea lady. Now they looked at her with something else. Recognition. Regret. Gratitude. Someone handed her a fresh cup of tea. Another asked, "What can I do to help?" No jokes. No sideways glances. No doubt. Mike, freshly back from the search team, was the first to step closer. His face was tired, sunburned, scratched, but his eyes met hers without flinching. "Ms. Bennett, can I ask you something?" His voice was careful. "Why didn't you say anything? About your background, your service?" Sarah looked at him calmly. No judgment. No defense. "Rank's just a patch," she said. "Competence, that's the quiet you hold on to when everything around you is screaming." She paused. "I didn't come here to lead. I came here to remember." Mike furrowed his brow. He didn't get it right away. "Remember what?" She smiled. Not kindly, not like a teacher, but with something deeper, almost bitter. What it means to be part of something bigger than yourself. Even if you're not on the front line. Even if all you're doing is making tea. He was quiet for a long time, then nodded. "Thank you," he said. "Not just for what you did, but for how you did it." Sarah didn't reply. She adjusted the map on the wall and looked out the window again, out where the snow no longer felt threatening. Later that day, as folks started cleaning up the lodge and resetting supplies, a young woman, maybe 20 years old, walked up to Sarah. She'd been the one who got overwhelmed on day one. Couldn't follow instructions. Scared to speak up. Now, in her hands, a small homemade medal, made from a can lid and a chocolate wrapper, drawn on it in black marker. "For calm in the storm." "It's not real, obviously," the girl said, embarrassed. "I just wanted to say thank you. You showed me who I could be. If I stopped being afraid." Sarah accepted the medal with both hands. She looked at it for a long time, not like it was a joke, but like it meant something. Something passed down. Something carried. "This isn't about me," she said quietly. "It's about what needs to be handed on, before it's too late." The girl nodded, and Sarah smiled. For the first time. Genuinely warm. Like she was seeing something she hadn't dared hope for. A generation she once taught, now reaching back for the torch. Sarah stood by the wood-burning stove, warming her hands over the dying flame, when Jack approached. He wasn't standing tall anymore. His shoulders had dropped, and his voice quiet, stripped of the usual edge. "Ms. Bennett," he began, then paused. "I need to apologize." He looked her straight in the eyes. "No excuses. No spin. I didn't hear you. Because I'm used to simulations, to things being under control, to a world where you can hit restart after a mistake." He exhaled. "But this was real." Sarah didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on the flame, as if the fire itself might lend her the right words. "In a real crisis," she said, finally, "no one yells pause. No one gets to reset the clock." She turned to face him. "Mistakes don't teach you here. They kill people." Jack nodded. "I get it now. Too late, maybe. But I get it." At that moment, someone walked into the lodge with a camera. A woman followed, holding a microphone. "Veterans Network News. We were told something remarkable happened here. Can we speak with the commander who saved the camp?" Sarah flinched, just a little. She backed toward the kitchen, ready to slip away. But Mike stepped into her path. "Ms. Bennett," he said gently, "maybe you should stay." Sarah shook her head. "It's not about me." And then Captain Wilson stepped forward. "That's exactly why you should." He wasn't forceful, just steady. Too often, the real professionals keep quiet. And too often, it's the ones who've never been under fire that do all the talking. He looked her in the eye. Calm. Grounded. People need to know what true leadership looks like. Not when everything's going according to plan, but when the plan falls apart, and you're still standing, holding the rest of us together. Sarah looked at him, then at the younger ones standing nearby, the same ones who didn't even know her name 2 days ago, now waiting for her to speak. She took a breath, stood straighter. "All right," she said, "but no big speeches." Wilson smiled. "We promise. Just the truth. It speaks for itself." When Sarah returned home, She expected everything to go quiet again. She figured the story would stay buried up there in the snow, along with the maps and the storm. But the phone started ringing the very next day. Veteran groups, rescue units, disaster response foundations. They wanted to hear her story, invite her, learn from her, train with her. To some, she'd become a hero. To others, a living reminder. And then came a call she hadn't expected. "Sarah, it's Thomas." The voice was gravelly. "Familiar. I served with Jack. Back in his command unit. He'd be proud of you." Sarah stayed quiet. "The Guard's starting a new emergency response program. We're trying to rebuild it. With people who've been through the real thing. Not slideshows. Not drills." He paused. "No uniforms. No titles. Just experience. Just you." After the call, Sarah stood in the hallway for a long time. Beside her, a cabinet she hadn't opened in nearly 3 years. She reached out, opened it. Inside, in the stillness, hung Jack's old field jacket. Beneath it, an old map, faded and folded just the way he used to pack it before every deployment. On the top shelf, his military radio. Everything exactly where he left it. Sarah ran her hand across the fabric. Rough, faded, still holding the warmth of his shoulders. Then, slowly, she let her fingers trace along the edge of the radio. With care, almost reverence, she let out a breath and whispered, barely audible, "One last mission." Like someone unseen had just given her permission, not for the past, but for those who were still ahead. The auditorium was full. Rows of chairs held soldiers, rescue workers, volunteers, people from the training retreat. Even the press sat quiet. No cameras, no flashes, just a stillness in the room. A kind of silence you only get when respect takes up all the space. When they called her name, Sarah Bennett walked out slowly. No formal uniform, no polished suit, just an old field jacket, a little too big across the shoulders. Jack's jacket, worn cuffs, faded insignia, patches that couldn't be bought, only earned. She stepped up to the mic and laid down a leather folder, edges burned, corners creased. Inside it, the same emergency protocol that had saved the camp. "I'm not a general," she began. Her voice was calm, clear, not loud, but somehow it reached every corner of the room. "I don't carry a rank anymore. And honestly, I never came here looking for recognition." She glanced around the room, eyes held still. In the third row, Mike. By the wall, Captain Wilson. Even Jack, the instructor, stood there, watching without blinking. But when real chaos starts, you don't need a rank. She paused. You need to remember who you are and what you carry inside. Sarah looked down at the jacket, ran her fingers across the fabric. Experience isn't a burden. It's your toolkit. It's what's left when everything else fails. Out in the field, when the first shot is fired or the mountain starts to move, no one asks about your degree or your title. They ask if you can hold the line. When everyone else is losing their footing. The room was still, utterly still. We live in a world that confuses volume with leadership, where surface matters more than substance. She lifted her gaze. But when the storm hits, what matters isn't what's printed on your badge. It's what's printed inside you. She stopped speaking, just for a beat. Then, one person stood. Then another. Then another. Applause started slow, then grew. Not loud, not wild, but steady, sustained, full of meaning. Sarah gave a small nod, just once, turned, and walked off stage. Her speech was over, but her story was just beginning. Early in the morning, while the sky was still gray and the world hadn't fully woken, Sarah headed back into the mountains. The snow crunched under her boots. The air was cold, but not unkind. She walked with purpose, the same way she had, years ago, beside Jack. On her shoulder, a backpack holding a med kit, a compass, a thermos, and a map marked by her own hand. Every few hundred yards, she stopped, scanned the terrain, marked shelters, checked the condition of old trails, tied ribbons to trees. Some might have called it pointless, stubborn, but not her. She wasn't chasing danger, and she wasn't running from the past. She was just going where she could still be useful, where she could leave behind what years had taught her. Not because another storm was coming, but because one could, and someone, someday, might come looking for a way through. And if they found her marks on a tree or a path she once mapped, it might just save a life. Sarah stopped at a ridge with a clear view of the valley below. She took a sip from the thermos, filled her lungs with mountain air, and smiled, not sadly, but with peace. Her journey wasn't over. It had simply changed direction, and in that new path, she'd found what always mattered most: purpose. Have you ever seen someone go from being ignored to being the one everyone turns to? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If you feel something in the quiet strength of this tale, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe. If you want more stories about the kind of heroes who don't ask to be noticed, but who make all the difference, I'll see you in the next one.